Should marijuana become legal in Texas? Good evening, everyone. I'm Linda Lorelle. Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. As of January 2014, Colorado has officially become the first state to legalize recreational marijuana. With hundreds of customers lining up to purchase cannabis in Colorado, now many Texans are ready to push for a move toward legalization in the Lone Star State when the legislature meets in 2015. Supporters believe that a regulation of marijuana will support free enterprise, reduce costs for law enforcement, and help prevent underage marijuana use. However, many opponents argue that this is an addictive drug causing long-term negative health effects, and similar to alcohol, it's a threat to public safety. So tonight we ask, should Texas and the rest of the country follow Colorado's lead? Will this help or hurt the war on drugs? And will legalization really help law enforcement? As always, during our discussion, we'll get additional perspective from members of our advisory board. To help guide us through this evening's discussion, we are pleased to welcome President of the Houston chapter of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, Steve Nolin. 339th District Criminal Court Judge, the Honorable Maria Jackson. Non-resident fellow in drug policy at the Baker Institute at Rice University and former chief of intelligence in the Houston Field Division of the DEA, Gary Hale. And Kyle Stozek, private contractor, investigator, polygraph examiner, and CEO of Definition Fortitude. Leading our discussion, as always, our hosts David Jones and Gary Polland.
Linda, you think we can get Kyle to give David a polygraph? That'd be my first question.
I'd like to see that.
Yeah. I'm just wondering whether Kyle has the fortitude to say that he's for legalizing marijuana.
Absolutely.
You have the fortitude?
Of course I do.
Well, give us your argument.
He's from Colorado. He probably voted for it.
I am from Colorado. I believe that it could definitely help the war on drugs. I mean, if you cultivated good marijuana here for the right reasons and provided the proper education to the youth, they probably wouldn't ship over the garbage that comes south of the border. I don't know.
Okay, but to be fair, and we know that Colorado has legalized. In fact, when I was in Colorado this summer, there were ads for marijuana stores and bakeries in the town I was in. Nothing had opened yet, and it's going to be taxed very heavily. And the marijuana apparently is very expensive. But the question I have is, what is this rush? I mean, the laboratories of democracy. We have 50 states. Colorado's trying it. Don't you all think, and I guess I'd start with, let's start with Steve, shouldn't we wait and see how it goes? I mean, what if it's a disaster in Colorado? That would tell us maybe we shouldn't. If everything works wonderfully, the opposite would be true. Isn't that true, Steve?
Well, I think arresting people for using marijuana is more of a disaster. I mean, it breaks up homes. I mean, there's been numerous studies that show that marijuana is safer than alcohol, so you should at least regulate it like alcohol.
And I think that's what they're doing in Colorado, are they not?
Yes.
Is that your understanding?
Yep.
Okay, in fact, why don't we do this? Why don't you explain for us, Kyle, how does the Colorado law work?
As far as
you know, how's it working? I mean, what happens? If you walk in, you show your ID like you want to buy alcohol, if you look young like I do, and then if you're old enough, you get to buy whatever you want?
pretty much you get to browse the selections, you purchase whatever you want to purchase within the proper quantities, and you use it in the comfort of your own home, safety of your own home.
Mr. Hale, you were a warrior, actually, in the war on drugs.
Sure.
This has to be a huge insult to you, I would think, for people to say, let's legalize
Well,
this
you
stuff.
know, being a former federal law enforcement officer, specifically in the intelligence division of DEA, we're soldiers in the drug war, in the so-called drug war. We basically just do what the Congress tells us to do. Just like any soldier going to Afghanistan. If the Congress passes a law and says you will enforce that law, then we enforce the law. And DEA is a single mission agency that is charged with enforcing the Controlled Substances Act, and that's what DEA does.
But the feds have said they're leaving Washington and Colorado alone. How does that work?
Well, that's a political decision that the president has conferred with the attorney general, and they decided that they're going to let that experiment kind of evolve and see how things go before the federal government steps in.
And Judge Jackson, you know, Barack Obama, he famously admitted to being a user of marijuana. I wonder if that's influencing his decision to have the feds lay off the laboratories of democracy that Gary's so proud of. You have opinion about?
I have no opinion about that.
But there is a question that's important for the judge because you have a felony docket, right?
Yes.
So I would take it the marijuana cases you deal with would not be user cases, small quantity cases. Those go to other courts.
Yes, they do.
You only deal with big numbers, pounds of marijuana cases that come to you. Is that correct?
True.
And of course, all the other drug cases you get.
Yes, the types of cases that I preside over begin with less than a gram all the way to the capital murder, death penalty
Less
cases.
than a gram of cocaine.
Less than a gram of cocaine.
So, and the percent of your docket that's drug oriented is what, a third, a half?
It might be possibly a third of my docket.
So, if they decriminalize all drugs, Judge, you'd have more time to deal with violent crime. I bet that's what your friend next to you is thinking right now.
Oh, definitely.
Is that what you would hope that, you know, because Judge McSpadden, who has been around for 30 years, he always goes to the legislature and says, we need to put small amounts of, right now, felony drugs in misdemeanor courts. Doesn't that make sense?
Well, I will say this. In 2009, Judge McSpadden wrote a letter to the legislators asking that less than a gram cases be sentenced from a felony to a misdemeanor. And out of the 22 district courts, 19 judges signed it, including me.
So, Mr. Hale, what we're witnessing at the criminal courthouse where Gary and I practice and Judge Jackson works is really pretty much a rebellion against prosecuting low-level drug cases. Juries do not want to sit all day listening to someone who's being prosecuted for small amounts of marijuana, certainly.
Well, it makes all the sense in the world. There's a social evolution, if you will, tipping in the favor of legalization. But you have to remember there's 3 different levels of legalization. There's personal use, there's medical marijuana, and then one area that has not been discussed much yet, and that has to do with international trade. So my point of view is more a pragmatic point of view. I'm not a proponent nor a opponent of marijuana legalization in any context. My statements have always been that there is a social trend towards legalization in all 3 areas, as personal use, medical marijuana, and certainly in the future trade. So therefore we should prepare. There's all kinds of civil law, criminal law, international law, and trade law that needs to be taken into consideration as this evolution occurs, and that is slowly happening. Like most things in our society and government, we are reactive in nature as opposed to proactive. And my suggestion is that we become more proactive. The Baker Institute actually is working with the South Texas College of Law here in Houston to prepare some model laws in each of those areas.
And you've been in Mexico, I believe, and are still
Sure, I
active.
do a lot of work in Mexico.
So, if there's any country that has been mostly, a seriously wounded country as a result of the drug war, it's Mexico. But I understand there's some shifting sentiment there too in their legislative activities dealing with.
Over the last several decades, Mexico has become a country that was not only a transit country for drugs coming from South America, primarily cocaine as a measure of drug trafficking, if you will, or a litmus test. Cocaine was coming from South America through Mexico into the United States. Mexico has always been a producer of opium. Mexico has always been a producer of marijuana, and now they're producing methamphetamine as well. So there's a lot of production in Mexico, and there's a lot of transit of drugs through Mexico. So for many years, it was a pass-through kind of situation, and all of a sudden, because of controls, because of law enforcement efforts, because of all kinds of activity that has occurred in the United States over the last several decades, it slowed down that transit or that traffic of drugs flowing through Mexico into the United States through the U.S.-Mexico border. That has caused a lot of those drugs to then be used on the streets of Mexico itself. So the user population has grown in Mexico, and that has caused a new social problem for Mexico that wasn't there before.
All right, so we talk about legalization of marijuana, and we talk about it from the political standpoint and what happens, but so far we haven't discussed marijuana's impact on the user, especially adolescents. And I did do a little research prior to the show today and read in allegedly authoritative publications by doctors who said, and by the way, a lot like alcohol, if you use it, it can adversely affect you, but they said pot damages the heart and lungs, increases anxiety, can increase depression and schizophrenia, and it's worse for adolescents. And by legalizing it, what we're saying and giving the message to, even though the Colorado law is over 21, is it's okay to use,
What do you
which
think about that,
encourages
Steve?
drug abuse.
You're the normal guy.
Well, I mean, marijuana is one of the most beneficial plants on the planet, but if you burn anything, you're going to get carcinogens coming into your body. If you burn a steak, the steak's going to have carcinogens. It's just the nature of burning things. I think what we advocate is to use it responsibly. I know there's some people that shouldn't be using marijuana. There are burnouts and stuff. So yeah, they shouldn't necessarily use it, but you shouldn't necessarily get thrown in jail, get thrown into the meat grinder of the justice system just because you use a plant.
Well, Judge Jackson, you see the impact that drugs have on people's lives, such as what Gary is alluding to. Is it marijuana, or is it some of the more riskier substances, I guess, like methamphetamines, that are doing more damage, do you think, among the population of people that you're seeing, maybe who you're putting on probation and maybe looking for treatment options for?
Well, most of the cases that come before me could be a marijuana user, distributor, cocaine user, methamphetamine, and PCP. How we have been addressing a lot of these nonviolent offenders, we've been using alternative sentencing, and that's placing them on probation, because there have been many studies done to show that it's more beneficial to rehabilitate the nonviolent drug users, especially the first-time offenders, than to put them in prison.
Yeah, I think one thing I think the government should do is to differentiate between use and abuse, because right now any person that uses marijuana is considered abusing it, and that's not necessarily the case. Like I said earlier, it's been proven to be safer than alcohol as far as the effects on your body. While NORML, we concentrate, on marijuana laws, also do some things with the Drug Policy Forum of Texas, and they're more in harm reduction. And personally, I think most things in its natural state, it can be used safely, like down in Peru. They do have a big cocaine trade down there, but the locals, a friend of mine, Dean Becker, he had went down there and to do some reporting, and he said the locals, they chew the leaves because the altitude's so high up there that it helps with the altitude sickness. But like I said, the government needs to get away from good drug, bad drug, because you can abuse anything. You can abuse food. You can abuse a lot of things that aren't even considered drugs, and it can be harmful to your body.
Linda, I understand you have a comment from our advisory panel on this subject.
I do, directly related to the conversation where it is right now. It's always important to get additional perspective from other members of our community, so we ask members of our advisory board to weigh in. Conservative radio talk show host Natalie Arsenault has this question: has there been a non-government funded long-term study on the effects of marijuana used medicinally and recreationally? And if so, what were the outcomes?
Mr. Hale, you may have something to offer on that.
I think that the closest report that I know, or study that I know, that was that addressed those issues were the Schaefer Commission report that was published in 1971 at the request of President Nixon. And as I recall from reading that lengthy report, at the end of the study, there was no harmful attribution given to marijuana. But that, as I said early on in the conversation, that wasn't the message that, or the answer that President Nixon wanted, so he discounted and discarded the report. So, and there's been plenty of studies that have been done that argue either way. It's like any law; it can be argued extensively, exhaustively on either side of the discussion. So, one of the ones that comes to mind, the most recent discussion about this issue was Dr. Sanjay Gupta that recently said that he was wrong. He reviewed the scientific analyses and decided that he had been wrong and that he had been misled because there's other data out there to support the argument that marijuana was not harmful. So I believe we have to have objective analyses and reviews of all the information available before we make a decision one way or the other.
Kyle, do we need to be worried about people high on our highways driving under the influence of marijuana?
You know, if they can pass a roadside test, that's when you figure out if they're impaired or not. We don't, you know, they can't take a breathalyzer, but they can sure take a roadside test. And if they pass the roadside test, it really doesn't matter what they smell like.
We have the most dangerous highways in the United States. Harris County does. We lose more people to drunk driving accidents than any other county in this country. You don't hear about marijuana killing people on highways. It's really almost ridiculous that the way we're handling these two drugs.
There's no specific, you know, like a blood and alcohol test for field use that's available to detect marijuana in the system on the roadside. That could be a reason. On the other hand, there could be other drugs that are in the body of impaired drivers that we don't know about. So those detection systems or analysis systems like a breathalyzer for marijuana or other drugs are still under development.
Do we know whether the state of Colorado is prepared to deal with that, driving while impaired?
I mean, absolutely. If you're impaired and you're doing something wrong, you're driving inappropriately, police are going to do their jobs, and they do a great job, especially here in Texas. They're going to pull you over, and they're going to check to see if you're impaired, and if you can pass the roadside and your motor skills are up to par, then you know that determines that you're.
If you're not, they take you in. Now take your blood.
If you're impaired, then they'll take your blood, and
they'll find you got drugs.
Judge Jackson, Mr. Hale brought up the Nixon experiment, and we know that Nixon basically used the language war on drugs first. Wondered if you could tell us something about, especially since you're an official who has to go out and talk to people in the community, whether or not there's some communities that have been more disadvantaged by the war on drugs than others. Have an opinion on that? Or do you not see driving while black being an offense in your court?
Well, I don't have an opinion on that.
Well, as far as affecting, I guess, minorities and things like that, the ACLU came out with that report last year showing how people of brown and black skin are getting more proportionally arrested for drug offenses, and then also I think HPD, they had kind of a counter on that, saying that, well, that's what we get the calls out for. They don't necessarily get calls out to the gated communities to come round up people that are standing on the street corner. But if you're more of a poor person that you may not have a big mansion to hang out in, you may be hanging out on the street corner.
Now, we're a political talk show, so let's talk about the politics of legalizing marijuana and how that falls.
I just tried.
I know, I'm going to get into that, but you asked the wrong person. I mean, the judge's not going to talk about politics. She's above that. But in Colorado, it was a vote of the people, right? The politicians obviously took a stand. Did the politicians divide along party lines, or was it like a mix?
You know, they took the consideration that that's what the people wanted, and the people voted on it, and they respected that.
So you didn't have,
I don't know
like,
how it's happening here in
say,
Texas.
Well, but I'm saying, so in Colorado, you're saying the Republicans did not necessarily say no, and the Democrats didn't necessarily say yes.
You know, the truth of the matter is that there's more education in Colorado.
In Texas?
As far as the drug policy and drugs go, there's more education, hands down. I mean, if you ever visited Colorado, your average person has tried marijuana, been around it. It's no big to-do for them out there. There's more entrepreneurs in Colorado. Well, I don't have the statistics, but I know of more entrepreneurs in Colorado that are successful running their businesses and understand how to regulate everything in balance. You know, they don't drink too much. Well, some do, but CEOs and people that are very driven that are running their own businesses focus on business. You know, they don't wake up in the morning pounding alcohol and vodka, and they don't wake up in the morning hitting the bong either. You know, they wait till they get home and then they crack a beer and, you know, maybe partake in a joint or whatnot, but they do it responsibly. And being responsible is key, and education is the only thing that's going to provide that.
Definitely.
I mean,
Yeah, Judge?
I'm not going to address the issue whether I'm for legalizing marijuana, but I will say that Texas, the Senate, in fact, in 2013, Senate Bill 462 was enacted into law, creating specialty courts, which include family drug courts, and veterans court, and a mental health court program. So I will say that Texas is addressing the issues of rehabilitation rather than locking them up in prison.
And I think Judge, you're citing that as an example because the legislature actually let you do that and set up the courts because you needed permission to do it.
Yes.
There are 40,000 people in prison today who've had marijuana as the basis for their...
Is that in the country?
In the country, 40,000 in prison. Why...
That's not counting the people on probation and pretrial.
Oh, right, and I'm sure it's in the billions is in terms of prison costs and administrative costs to run courts and cop costs and whatnot to go after 6 grams of marijuana in the backpack of a teenager riding a bicycle. So I mean, this drug
in
war...
Colorado, that's illegal for teenagers to have marijuana because you got to be 21. So remember that.
So, Mr. Hale, I mean, war on drugs, failure.
No, I think the jury's still out on that, to tell you the truth, because there's been a lot of successes attributed to you know, you've got the demand side and the supply side. So there's always this attempt to balance how much effort you're going to put on demand.
They have not, they've not made it cheaper. I mean, more expensive, which was the argument. Let's make it expensive, and then nobody will.
Without picking a particular drug, let's just go with cocaine. I remember probably around 2006 or 2007, we detected that the price of cocaine at the wholesale level, kilo, in New York City had gone up from $15,000 to $30,000. So we backtracked and did our research. It took about a year to figure out prices had gone up, purity had gone down, and availability had gone down. So why was that? Why is it that cocaine is going up twice as much at the wholesale level, $15,000 to $30,000 in New York City? And it was because of the supply side effort that had the United States government and the government of Colombia and the government of Mexico and everybody in between in the transit zone and the source countries and the transit zone all the way through Mexico into the United States had done their job. They had effectively crimped that flow, and at the end of that food chain, if you want to call it that, or supply chain, the availability was impacted such that there wasn't enough and therefore it had to be cut more, which means that the purity was down and the price went up. So that's a good example of supply side efforts having some effect.
And then they moved to methamphetamines.
Which means that there's less people, probably, less people using cocaine. Whether they went to another drug or not, I can't answer that question because I don't know.
Steve, I know you're a big advocate of legalization, but my question is, are you an advocate of legalization for children too?
No, we believe it should be left up to adults like alcohol, because when your body's growing in your teenage years and before, then you don't necessarily, need an intoxicant or something like that. Also, the same as far as like owning guns and things like that, if a child has a gun, I know there's some medical studies showing as far as with children with epilepsy that marijuana helps with. While that's all right, it should be under supervision of an adult.
So do we anticipate being as successful in stopping adolescents from getting access to legalized marijuana as we've had stopping adolescents' access to illegal alcohol?
I think so. If you start getting the laws in place, start getting it regulated, because I know back in my younger days, I was around 21, and then I was hanging out with a friend of mine, and he was 19 or 20, and we were out drinking and stuff like that, and we got pulled over by a cop, and I got a $130 ticket for providing alcohol to a minor, and That was the last time I provided alcohol to him.
And that's still a crime in Colorado to sell to minors.
Yeah,
So-
you know, but not for the medical purposes. That needs to be revisited, especially with epilepsy alone. That's one of the reasons why Sanjay Gupta changed his opinion. I have a friend who was having 40 seizures a year and privately got his license to smoke, and he was against it, and he was ashamed that he even got it. But after his year mark, he then came out and said, you know what, this past year I went down to 1 seizure this entire year where normally I had 40.
So Linda, I want to thank the panel. You were very interesting, and I want to tell Linda, now we've learned that if we get David a medical marijuana prescription, maybe it'll cure what ails him.
I need medical everything. I
Is
can tell
that
you
what
that.
we learned from this discussion,
That's what
Gary?
I
Are
learned.
you sure? Okay, thank you. And remember, you can catch Red, White, and Blue every Friday at 7:30 p.m. right here on Channel 8, and again Saturdays at 6:30 p.m. We also invite you to visit us online and send us your comments. We want to hear what you are saying about the issues that affect Houston. You can submit your comments at HoustonPBS.org or on Facebook, and while you're there, don't forget to like us. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again next week. Good night.